You were asked by the evidence leader today if state capture is only found in countries in transition. You went on to say that countries in transition have institutions that are either more in flux or are initially starting out at a weak standpoint. So vulnerability towards capture is a lot higher. Explain that further to me.
Yes, my pleasure to be with you, Jeremy, here on this very important program. I'm not a big expert in South Africa, but I've looked into these issues around the world for a long time. First point regarding transition that I think it's extremely important to be mindful of is that transition, it's a process, it's something that it's being experienced in very advanced countries as well as emerging economies. It's not to be conflated just with developing countries of that. So sophisticated countries, right now the UK, Britain, is on a major state of transition, where there will be also vulnerabilities regarding major institutions and laws that have to be changed. That's point number one, that transition is not unique to just developing countries. I come from Chile in Latin America. We have had many transitions, particularly after many military governments. Brazil is emblematic over decades and so on. The vulnerabilities that are particularly strong regarding transition, and that was very evident in the countries of the former Soviet Union, which Professor Hellman and myself have studied for a long time, referred first to the political institutions. How do robust political parties and political institutions develop so there is a competitive system and where the political campaign finance is done in a fair, legal, and clear manner, and is not being abused to unduly influence the shaping of the laws or the regulation of the policy of the countries, which is what some in the elite in those countries try to do. So the political aspect is crucial. Also, there are very important economic institutions, and this including state-owned enterprises, and their role will play a key factor. Weaknesses regarding the safeguards in Ministry of Finance and the Treasury are crucial also for transition. So one can go in a systematic way throughout the main organizations and institutions in the country and assess that vulnerability. That will vary from country to country.
Are there early warning signs as far as that vulnerability is concerned, or is this something which is slow creep? It simply arrives unannounced and all of a sudden a country has a big problem?
It's certainly not the latter, that this is an overnight issue. It's something that can arrive and be a huge challenge relatively quickly, as in the case of the post-Soviet Union, because there was a dramatic historical event in the collapse of a whole system, which was the planned economy and socialist communist political system, and they basically had to reinvent institutions from scratch. So overnight, the process of capture starts, but in terms of it manifesting itself and all the consequences of that, it has taken years. I'm just here now for a few days. Previously, I was invited to do something similar and work in Ukraine for a few days, which is still feeling the after effects or the current effects of major capture from the early days, which is in the 1990s. Of that transition. Transition, this is another thing. Transition takes much longer than people think. So transition is not just 5 years after a major collapse or regime change. It could be a generation.
As we are experiencing in this country. It's also, Mr. Kaufmann, about playing the system. You also said at the State Capture Commission today that it can be done through legal means according to the law of the country at the moment. Is that simply expediency and taking advantage, or are the laws themselves weak?
A combination of both. But just to make it very clear, Jeremy, while it can be done through legal means, and we have studied the notion of legal corruption, so to speak, it still prevails enormously with illegal actions that are very actionable from the judiciary standpoint. So that's no reason not to take prosecutorial action and impunity, number one. Number two, the way it's done through legal means at times in some countries is because the laws existing at the moment have been distorted and shaped by the process of state capture and undue influencing by the elite itself that weigh in the lawmaking process, including with Parliament, so to ensure that the laws are in their benefit. In the United States, and I mentioned this morning, what was illegal and considered bribery in the illegal sense, and a governor of a state of Virginia was sitting in jail as a result, it goes all over to the Supreme Court, and the laws and its interpretation is significantly narrowed, and what he did and was illegal at that time, it's now legal. So it goes in the reverse action. Conversely, because of the Wall Street financial crisis, which is another emblematic case study of state capture, which affected the whole world, in late 2000s, you have, as a result, after that, major changes in the financial regulations and laws. What was legal before, it's now illegal.
This might seem like a very shallow question. I know that you've only been here a few days, but I'm assuming that you've had an opportunity to scope the bigger problem as far as state capture is concerned in this country. From your experience and having worked and observed other countries, do you think it's any worse here?
Well, as an analyst and as a complete convert into the significant importance of evidence-based analysis research, and we do a lot with data, 2 days is not enough. So
I acknowledge that, yes.
But I can say, on the basis of experiences everywhere else, that every country has its distinct features, which is why so much homework has to be done at the country level, why I think it's commendable that there is a commission of inquiry, and if that can basically produce a dynamic of a debate and a discussion towards reforms will be extremely important and historical for a country like South Africa. And it is an example that I'm already giving in other parts of the world. So the issue of better or worse, it's all relative because state capture comes in so many different guises and manifestations that it may be very prevalent for 2 or 3 institutions, and there may be 2 or 3 captors. In the former Soviet Union, we call them oligarchs, and so on. In other countries, there may be other organizations, and so on. So it's not so much for a ranking of that. Each one of these countries has its own challenges, like Brazil has had, and so on, with a huge scandal around the car wash and so on. But and it would have to be addressed not according to the severity of state capture so much, but the particularities of what led to it, where were incentives, what incentives need to be changed in the system, and what are the significant policy reforms that are needed.
So, Mr. Kaufmann, finally then, you were also asked towards the end of your testimony today by the evidence leader, once a country determines that state capture has been has occurred, what then? Are there solutions?
Yeah, basically, the answer is yes, and whether it's determined that it's state capture or more broadly grand corruption and corruption in different means, the most important next step is the political will and the political consensus, kind of a social and political contract. Let's work together towards addressing it, because it's not only the homework for one organization in the executive or in the judiciary or in the legislative. Each one has to play its role, but it has to be a concerted effort where it's extremely important. From the success cases that I have observed and we have looked at and worked with, the role of leaders in civil society, in think tanks, that also are opinion makers. The role of the media is absolutely crucial, as well as the branches of government, the executive, the legislative and the parliament. It's absolutely crucial, and it's this multi-stakeholder approach working together, it's absolutely critical. And then one would have to do the hard work, what needs to be done regarding rule of law, regarding political finance, regarding SOEs. There are about 6 or 7 particularly vulnerable organizations and set of policies of laws where reforms typically need to be enacted. Which ones are the priority depends on the country specifics.